Folks, we got a lot to talk about, because Victoria 3 is taking a look at what it can do, and that will then be coming out in Q3. Today in this video, I will tell you everything that you need to know when it comes to the upcoming 1.4 patch, the DLC, and of course, the 1.5 open beta that will probably make sure that I personally will never actually play 1.4, because, well, what is in the open beta will change things so dramatically that I'm not gonna touch the base version to begin with. In this video, I will tell you everything that you need to know, I will discuss it, and I will invite you to give me your opinion on what you think when it comes to this and whether you're optimistic or pessimistic. Let's take a look at 1.4. The highlights that we are about to discuss here for 1.4, which is the patch that is to be releasing after the summer break and comes with the very first cosmetic-only DLC, I believe it is largely a day and night cycle, is also an update that brings a whole bunch of changes. Again, as I said, nothing too dramatic in comparison to 1.5, but nonetheless quite a bunch of things. Now, the first changes coming with 1.4 are convoy raiding revisions. These revisions, you might say, should be fairly extensive, because raiding, being raided, and just doing anything with the Navy is just quite annoying right now. Sadly, I have to disappoint you right there, these changes do not go that far at all. All they really do is make it more efficient to raid, make it easier and more efficient to defend against raiding, and at the same time making it so that indeed, well, you shouldn't just be as finicky with this mechanic as we currently are. How often have I taken a look at a Navy, seen that they're raiding me, set myself to defend against raids, and they just changed the C node they are in. What exactly this means, of course, is slightly up in the air. This is fairly vague. All it means is that it will be more efficient from both sides. That should make it easier as well. But fundamentally, this is more an anti-finicky activity rather than an activity that makes the Navy more interesting. Now, the next thing, on the other hand, is very important, although it is also really only a balance change. I am talking about changes to goods substitutions. The changes made here should ensure that modders can work with this much more easily than they currently can. Trust me, I mod a lot and it's not that great, but more importantly, it should just make it so that, well, the packages that are now rebalanced, the decisions that pops make when it comes to what they purchase and what they don't purchase, should be a bit better informed. In previous patches, this wasn't the case, and this has then led, of course, to the art influx or the art academy influx, to the instability when it comes to urban center profitability and so on, none of which is desirable or good. That has now been changed, but of course there are always things to fix. As I said, everything is the economy and the economy is everything. This is a very important change, although of course as a balance change it might seem slightly less interesting than it actually is. Now, the next one I'm fairly split about, if not rather negative, and that is subject independence wars. Subject independence wars currently keep the subject in the market of the overlord, meaning that you still pay them and that you are still in their market, meaning that if you, for example, supply all the weapons to the market, they get to buy your weapons, and yeah, that doesn't really make sense. And while I agree that that doesn't make sense, changing it now is not something that I'm very positive about in its own right. If you've ever had a rebellion, especially in the late game, but really at any point, you will know that these economies in these rebellions essentially always collapse. What I mean here is that yes, of course, the revolutionary country is in a different market compared to the non-revolutionary country, but that is actually a detriment for both sides, because it means that the entire economy that was working with the entire market rather than two split markets is now no longer working. If you've ever seen a civil war in the late game in particular, where then the state budgets have ballooned, you're looking at a situation where, yep, indeed, everybody just goes bankrupt. I fear that when it comes to subject rebellions, which currently, to be fair, is basically a player-only thing, that we will see this as well. Should this issue not be addressed when it comes to the economic instability, for example, with other AI countries and great powers being willing to finance and to bankroll these rebellions and these rebellious subjects, then I think that this might actually be a negative change, because it will just never work. And I know that I'm repeating myself here, but the economy is everything, and breaking it for anybody that is an open rebellion, yeah, it usually doesn't work that well. We have to see how this works in practice, but I'm concerned that this will actually have a negative impact on gameplay overall. The last change that is for 1.4 is a fairly minor one, but also a very important one, and that is the revision of the imperialist AI. In general, I think it has to be said, the AI intervenes all too often. They are very happy to get obligations from AI countries, even if those obligations don't mean anything. And they seem to enjoy Japan and China despite, well, wanting to imperialize them. system. As it stands, of course, that is very annoying. I have heard, they have talked about this previously on the Victoria 3 Discord, that they are looking towards a person that is just working on AI strategies. If you've played with my mod or with the amazing Divergences mod, then you will know just how important AI strategies are. If the AI doesn't know what is going on, then they apply a fairly vague general behavior, and that often just doesn't work very well. Seeing additional AI changes here is definitely a really good call. Nonetheless, there is still quite a bit that needs to be done when it comes to AI decision making. We should always take a look at what has been done for the divided monarchist journal entry from Voice of the People, because that journal entry and the behavior of who is on the throne in France also actually impacts virtually everything internally and externally when it comes to the decision making the AI does. That has to be expanded. This is a good start, but definitely we need to push it further. Now you might say, honestly, these aren't too many changes, this isn't all too exciting. Oh, we get some tweaks, oh, we get some rebalancing, and that's it. That is 1.4. We need something more. And, well, let me tell you, there is something more, and it's massive, and I am cautiously optimistic. I say cautiously here because some of these things are massive changes. We're seeing a situation here that could be quite interesting and that isn't being released in this stable patch. I hope it makes a lot of sense now that we are seeing all these fairly minor and yet impactful changes in the 1.4 release because, well, they're tested, they're thoroughly analyzed and of course audited. The rest of this video won't deal with any of these fairly standard changes. It will instead be dealing with what will be in the 1.5 open beta. And I hope that afterwards you'll understand why I say that I would probably never even touch 1.4. Let's start by talking about something that is oh so important: shared fronts. 1.5 will definitely be the update that deals with a whole lot of warfare, and I think that is exactly right. That is what is needed. I've talked about this in the past as well, that I personally believe that what the war system needs more than anything is to make it less finicky, to make it easier to use so that any additional features make sense rather than just being annoying. One of the biggest things that I have mentioned ever since the review, and that I've mentioned internally of course a lot as well, be that in the Victoria 3 Discord, be that with other content creators and so on, that is the frontline system. Getting shared fronts is a big step here. It makes it so that we're looking at a situation where fighting Austria and Saxony and Bavaria doesn't create 3 individual fronts plus Krakow, so technically 4. It will create a single front. I think it's very easy to see how this will be a very good change. Obviously, there are also potential pitfalls here. What happens with the battle frequency? What happens with the actual supply status? And so on and so forth. What happens if the front lines do decide to split at some point? These are questions that we definitely need to take a look at, that are definitely going to be important to analyze once the open beta comes out. But hey, all of these questions are something I'm happier about compared to the frontline disaster that is Germany if they actually fight it out. Now, of course, the devs are also thinking about these potential pitfalls and weaknesses, one of them being the battle frequency, and they are saying that there will be multiple simultaneous battles per front. Now, this one is good, but I'm cautious about it. It reads in particular that these battles will start if the front is long enough and if you have generals available. Let's say you have a very long front, maybe you are fighting as Prussia or as Germany together with Austria against Russia. Does that mean that you can trigger 8? Does it mean that you can trigger 16? How many battles can you actually trigger there? I'm thinking about this, I'm talking about this because this could be a big issue with just how fast and how slow these sort of battles and these sort of fronts move. Ultimately, it is all a balance issue, but it is something to keep in mind. I also thought about this and I said to myself, honestly, when we take a look at the generals and how they advance and how they appear to be dealing with this in the new upcoming 1.5 system, maybe not the raw general number, which is implied right here, but maybe sort of an offensive value would be better to, for example, emulate single battles or fairly sporadic battles in the early period of the game and then many small battles in the later period. Because at that point we could also reach, let's say, 100 battles if they are all just over one province. Either way, I'm excited for this because I'll be honest with you, it can't be more annoying than it is right now. And as I said, these hygiene factors, these finicky issues are always on the top of my request list right here. The other thing, of course, that is also very important is reverse sway in diplomatic plays coming. My god, finally, it is actually happening. We're looking at this, we're saying, I want this piece of the cake. and then we can tell the AI about it. Right now we need to pray, right now we need to hope that we get what we want, and that just isn't really that ideal. Nothing negative about this, I think. I think this is just incredibly, incredibly good, and I'm honestly just incredibly happy that it is coming in 1.5 rather than in spheres of influence. Now the next change, yet again something that is unequivocally good, and that is being able to call your allies into diplomatic plays instead of them following you in without a question. This is good because right now, let's say you play Greece, let's say you ally Serbia, you can't offer Serbia anything when it comes to fighting the Ottomans, which is of course frustrating. You want Serbia to get its land. This is something that will be changed with this, of course. They won't auto-join. Yes, we could request they join as an ally, but realistically speaking, I could just say, hey, why don't you take over southern Serbia? This should ease the pain of all of these situations as well. Let's just hope that it definitely develops into the right space. Ideally, quite frankly, I would also like it if I could offer a puppet that is forced into my war, something for joining that war, even if I don't have to. Just because, hey, again, if I puppet Serbia and want to offer them something as well, I can't. They will just join the war. That aside, they also are adding a bunch of new sways, which you can see right here in this screenshot. Ask for obligation, ask for war goals, ask for become subject, ask for transfer states. So that means Belgium could give us some states rather than us taking some spoils of wars. Very, very cool stuff. And ask for diplomatic pacts. All of these are super cool. Now, it has been said, and I think there is quite some merit to this idea, that diplomatic plays as they are now don't really add anything to the process of declaring war. People barely ever back down, and when they do, it was so one-sided that even had it come to a war, nothing really would have changed. As it stands, it just appears to be a delay between you clicking the button and then the button having the effect of the war actually starting. I think that is quite reasonable, because there's not much more going on there. These offer supports, these reverse sways, these new sway goals, these changes to allies and so on, hopefully make these diplomatic plays quite a bit more interesting. I would definitely like even more changes here, for example, switching between primary to and then removing that war goal, and even during the war making this choice, to just say I will fully drop this war goal. Obviously there are pitfalls there as well, but that would be interesting largely because it would make it so that full capitulation isn't always the full outcome out of any diplo play that I start. But be that as it may, this is the way it currently is, and these reverse sway offers, these new offers, they're definitely an incredibly welcome addition. Now the next change is away from war, it is away from diplomacy, and it is probably, in my eyes at the very least, the most impactful change yet. I'm talking about local price variations. Right now, when you are playing, for example, France, you will basically always have 100% infrastructure, which makes it so that groceries will be the same in Paris as they are in Bordeaux, as they are, for example, in Brest, as they are anywhere in your market, as long as there is 100% infrastructure. This will no longer be the case, and this is a really, really risky move. Let me tell you, first of all, I think this is a necessary move almost to make the industry and to make the economy interesting. I can always just re-quote the example of the Silesian weavers that went bankrupt. Yes, they technically would have been profitable in Victoria 3 right now, because, well, they just produced something, and even if they don't go into any of the advanced production methods, their stuff will largely find somebody that buys it. There's never any reason to have different PMs between different states, and it's not really something the game encourages, because the UI would be so damn finicky if I had to manually change the production methods in each of my states. It would be terrible, it would be annoying, and yet it would be something that might be coming with a local price variation. What this means is that if you have a lot of consumers of any given utensil, of any given product in a location, in a state, you might want to be producing that product in that very same state, because this will make it so that it can indeed be actually distributed locally, meaning the price will be better for the producers and of course for the consumers as well. It also means that if you produce a thing where its input actually is also located, you will also be faring better. This could mean, and I'm being dead serious here because, man, that could be a lot of finicky stuff, which is why I'm very, very cautious here, as excited as I am for it. It could mean that you need to set your production methods in Silesia for example, textiles manually compared to production methods in the highly urbanized and industrialized Rhineland. Now, on the one hand, that is incredibly cool, because it would make it so that the Silesian weavers would have a completely different makeup. It would be more petite bourgeoisie, for example, dominated, whereas on the other hand, in the Rhineland, you would have industrialized circumstances, an impoverished working class that is disenfranchised from the means of production and so on. And yet, I'm incredibly worried because I personally don't want to go and look at all my individual production methods. That sounds super, super bad. It is also something, of course, that would lead to different profitability calculations, primarily making it so that some buildings just go bankrupt, but having to micro that also sounds like hell. I am incredibly excited for this potential. Now, local prices aren't new, they're currently in the game, they just don't really work in any meaningful fashion, it doesn't play a big role. But unless the UX solution for this is insanely good, unless production methods at some point might become semi-automated, I'm worried. Now equally, and again I need to stress this, if this is executed well, I am incredibly excited because, man, again, the political makeup, the well-being of the nation, and the national makeup just in general could be noticeably different between states where right now, hey, listen, if you're urbanizing there, you're urbanizing everywhere. Hey, if your standard of living is being raised here, it's being raised everywhere. Obviously, that's not historical, and obviously that is something the game should change, and they're clearly trying to do it. But yeah, I'm skeptical. Now, the next topic is something I think that we can just collectively agree is quite good and should be a decent change no matter what happens. New buildings and production methods are being added. You can see right here the vineyards of Fars are being established. Instead of this now being a split secondary production method, it becomes its own building, it becomes its own production method, and so on. Nothing wrong with this. I think this is the right approach. Right now, as it stands, it's fairly annoying. Oh, I cannot build this because I'm not building enough of the other secondary product. This is the case with wood as well, of course, with hardwood and so on. I don't think this is something that could be controversial by any stretch because, well, yeah, it just makes sense. Now, the next two changes are as important as the local price variations are for the economy, but this is for the military. I'm talking about retreat and pursuit, which will make it so that your battles end quicker if, well, they are one-sided and it's basically already over. Great change, nothing wrong with that. The other one is about military formations. This is a big change. This is a change that is necessary. As skeptical as I am when it comes to the topic of the local price variations being something that isn't just going to be incredibly finicky, I'm not at all skeptical about this. We've discussed this here in fairly vague terms, of course, as it is, because we're not the ones to implement it on the channel, on the Victoria 3 Discord server, on my Discord server, and that is the issue of generals being the leaders of any given army. It's kind of weird, it's kind of annoying, and it leads to some edge cases that are just not that great. Now, with the changes being made to advances, to shared fronts, and so on, they're clearly also making changes to military formations right here. This will be a major revision to how you manage and organize your armed forces to give you more intuitive control both before and during active warfare, while still retaining the option to let wars play out on their own. Military formations are currently in very active development, and they are expecting it to receive a lot of iteration and polish over the course of the 1.5 open beta. Now, it has to be said, what exactly this means, we don't know. Either way, I am hoping that instead of me saying, hey, all of these generals individually go to this frontline, I can say this military formation is going to this frontline, this navy formation is going to this task. Because once we can do this, we can also talk about so many other things. For example, a military hierarchy. For example, different positions in the military hierarchy that are then attached to the École de Guerre, but also to the political reality of the armed forces interest group. These changes would be great. It could also mean that we're getting stations for fleets, and I mean, that would just be amazing. And it again could mean that we would be getting vessels, which we could potentially trade. I've read up so much about the Navy in the recent months. I've read about all the vessel exchanges, about all the vessel missions where, for example, Prussia would do various circumnavigations of the globe just so that their ships could be, hey, for example, in China and be like, hey, I exist, I'm Prussia. Or that they could be in Chile and say, hey, you got a civil war right there, leave the German owners alone, okay? Don't touch their land, don't touch their farms, and so on. And then they would literally just sit there and be like, we're witnessing this conflict, we're taking a look at it. They did this in Spain as well and actually captured a couple of vessels as well. This is all some super interesting stuff that we currently cannot emulate at all. Whether that is all coming, whether that is even the concept that the devs are going with, who knows? But I gotta tell you, this is just a great change. It should fundamentally alter just how we actually approach this when it comes to dealing with the Navy and to dealing with armies. So to conclude it all, I think it is very, very important to really point out that I was hoping for warfare to be much less finicky, to go into a direction that is a solid framework, a solid foundation rather than a super annoying one. And all of the changes as we see them here definitely go into this direction. And it's very important to take a look at the intention right here, because they could be doing changes, but if they have the wrong intention, yeah, whatever the changes are, it's not going to fix the core issue. This right here addresses the root while also at the same time doing some massive stuff for diplomacy, despite of course not being the Sphere of Influence update coming in Q1 2024, but these changes are all good. Now my biggest concerns here are definitely attached to the local price variations, not because of what it does, I think it's great what it's doing, but if this comes without automation of production methods, without huge changes to the production method UX, quite frankly, I mean, there's no way around this, right? If I just get the national list of buildings and I need to hover over all of this, it's gonna be a disaster. It's gonna be super, super dry and super, super bad to handle. If they figure that one out, though, it should be one of the best changes made, because it would create different setups on your political, your economical, your literacy, your standard of living, and so on, makeup of each state in your country. And that would be a massive, massive shift compared to, well, everybody's rich now, which we have right now. Either way, I'm very excited for these upcoming changes. I think I'm going to hop straight into 1.5 whenever it becomes available. But until then, we're going to be playing some VTM, we're going to be playing some Divergences, I think. I absolutely adore that mod, and we're going to do this here, of course, on the channel. I will see you then. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments, and I'll see you later, alligator.